The cold stone floor leached the last of the warmth from her bones. Elara shivered, a tremor that had nothing to do with the chill of the dungeons and everything to do with the gnawing emptiness in her belly. Hunger was a constant companion, a dull ache that had sharpened over the last week into a visceral, clawing beast. It was that beast that had driven her to take the half-loaf of stale bread. Not for herself, but for Anya, whose cough had grown ragged and wet in their shared, threadbare cot in the servants' quarters. Now, that single act of desperation was her death sentence. For the crime of theft against the stores of the Blackmir Citadel, Lord Valerius's voice echoed, smooth and cruel as polished obsidian, you are condemned. He stood before her cell, a silhouette of smug satisfaction against the torchlight. His silver-embroidered doublet was immaculate, a stark contrast to the filth she was kneeling in. He was of the Vanthorn line, a viper nested among the wolves of the ruling Shadowmir clan. His ambition a poorly veiled secret. He had always looked at her with a particular disdain, as if her very existence as a nameless, orphaned servant was a personal insult. Elara lifted her chin, the effort making her head swim. Her throat was too dry to speak, too raw from her pleas for mercy an hour ago. They had fallen on deaf ears. Anya had been dragged away, sobbing, while Elara was thrown in here to await her fate. You will face the trial of the beast, Valerius declared, a serpent's smile playing on his lips. You will be presented as an offering to the Alpha King. A wave of ice colder than any stone washed through her. Not that. Anything but that. Whispers of the Alpha King were the stuff of nightmares, ghost stories told to frighten naughty children and keep rebellious lords in line. Kaelen, the Shadowmir Alpha, a being of immense ancient power who had not been seen in the lower halls of the Citadel for decades. They said he was more wolf than man now, a creature of pure, feral rage, his sanity worn thin by a curse that plagued his bloodline. His own council feared him. They fed his needs, managed his kingdom, and left him to his isolation in the highest spire of the fortress, a beast in a stone cage, and they were going to feed her to him. It was not a trial. It was an execution, a particularly gruesome one, meant to make an example of her. May the Ancient One find your scrawny flesh to his liking, Valerius sneered. He turned on his heel, his laughter a sharp, ugly sound that followed the guards as they unlocked her cell door. Rough hands hauled her to her feet. The world tilted, black spots dancing in her vision. She was too weak to fight, a leaf caught in a merciless current. They dragged her through winding corridors, up countless flights of stairs, each step taking her further from the familiar world of servitude and closer to the heart of the kingdom's fear. The air grew thinner, charged with a strange electric tension that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. It smelled of ozone, of old stone and something else, something wild and musky and deeply unsettling. The guards stopped before a pair of colossal doors carved from weirwood, the grain shimmering with a faint internal light. They were bound in black iron wrought into the shapes of snarling wolves. This was it, the den, the throne room of the beast. One of the guards gave her a rough shove forward, his face pale with dread. The Alpha King grows impatient with trespassers. This is as far as we go. They unchained her wrists, the metal clattering loudly in the oppressive silence. Then they were gone, their footsteps pounding in a hasty retreat, leaving her alone before the monstrous doors. A profound, terrifying quiet descended. There was no sound from within, no growl, no movement, just a heavy, waiting presence that felt like a physical weight against her chest. What was she supposed to do? Walk in? Was she meant to serve herself up on a platter? Before she could make a choice, a low groan of stressed metal and stone echoed through the hall. The great weirwood doors swung inward, opening into a cavernous space steeped in shadow. She could see very little, only the suggestion of immense pillars and a high, vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. At the far end of the room, upon a dais of jagged, unworked basalt, sat a throne, and on that throne, a shape of shadow and menace. It was him, the beast, the monster, the Alpha King. He was larger than any man she had ever seen, a hulking silhouette that seemed to drink the very light from the air. Even from this distance, she could feel the power rolling off him in palpable waves, a visceral pressure that made it hard to breathe. It was a predatory stillness, the coiled tension of a wolf about to strike. This was the end. A brutal, bloody, and entirely meaningless end to a small and miserable life. A strange sort of calm settled over her. If she was to die, she would not do it cowering. Taking a shaky breath, Elara walked forward. Her worn leather slippers made no sound on the polished stone floor. She kept her eyes fixed on the shadow on the throne, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. With every step she took, the pressure in the air intensified, the wild, musky scent growing stronger, invading her senses. It was overwhelming, primal, and yet, underneath the terror it sparked, there was something else. Something horribly, impossibly familiar. A scent that felt like home. The thought was so absurd, so utterly insane that she almost stumbled. Home. The scent of a monster was home? It had to be the hunger, the fear, making her mind fracture. She was halfway across the vast chamber when he moved. He did not stand, but simply shifted, and 2 points of light ignited in the darkness of his face. Eyes. They were not the eyes of a man. They were the luminous, searing gold of a wolf, molten and burning with an intensity that seemed to peel back the layers of her soul. The raw power in that gaze struck her like a physical blow, rooting her to the spot. Her defiance shattered. Her breath hitched. All she could do was stare into those burning golden orbs, a rabbit caught in the unblinking gaze of a hawk. A low sound rumbled from his chest. It was not a word, but a growl so deep it vibrated through the stone floor and up into her bones. It was a sound of pure, undiluted possession, a sound of recognition. He rose from the throne, and Elara's heart stopped. He was immense. A giant carved from stone and fury, clad in dark leathers and furs. His dark hair was long, unbound, framing a face that was all harsh angles and brutal authority. He was not the twisted, slavering beast of the stories, but something far more terrifying, a perfect predator in the shape of a man. He descended the dais, his movements fluid and silent, his molten gaze never leaving her. This was the moment of the kill. He would cross the space in a heartbeat, and her life would be over. She closed her eyes, a single tear escaping to trace a cold path through the grime on her cheek. She thought of Anya, of the stolen bread, of a life spent invisible and afraid. But the tearing claws and snapping teeth never came. Instead, she felt the air shift before her. The overwhelming pressure of his presence was suddenly right there, his wild scent enveloping her completely. She dared to open her eyes. The Alpha King stood before her, so close she could see the flecks of amber in his luminous golden eyes. He was looking at her with an expression of raw, stunned disbelief, his powerful body radiating a tremor of restrained violence. His nostrils flared, breathing in her scent as if it were the finest wine, the most vital air. His wolf, the beast she had been sent to, was staring out at her through his eyes, and it was not with hunger. It was with awe. Slowly, with a reverence that seemed utterly alien to the monstrous power he commanded, the great Alpha King Kaelen went down on one knee. He lowered his head, the proud, fearsome ruler of the Shadowmir, and knelt on the cold stone floor, at her feet. The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by Elara's own ragged, disbelieving gasp. He knelt before her, the condemned servant girl, the sacrificial lamb. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble, a blade wrapped in velvet, thick with an emotion she could not name. They fed you to the beast to quell its hunger. He lifted his head, his molten gold eyes locking with hers, searing her to the very core of her being. Instead, you have awakened a famine only you can satisfy. The words hung in the air, a pronouncement that shattered her world far more completely than any act of violence could have. He was not going to kill her. He was claiming her. Before she could process the impossible reality of it, his large, calloused hand reached out, not to strike but to gently cup her cheek. The touch was electric. A searing heat, a jolt of pure energy shot through her, chasing away the cold, silencing the gnawing hunger in her stomach, and igniting a fire deep within her she never knew existed. In that single, shocking moment, everything changed. The beast had not devoured the offering. It had bowed. His thumb stroked her skin, a gesture of such unexpected tenderness that it stole the breath from her lungs. The sheer size of him, the raw, coiled power held in perfect check just for her, was dizzying. Why? Why was he looking at her like this? Like she was something precious, something found after an eternity of searching. It made no sense. She was nothing. A nameless, starved orphan. He was a king, a monster. Mine, he growled, the word a possessive, visceral vibration against her skin. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement of absolute fact, a truth his entire being seemed to recognize on a level she couldn't begin to comprehend. He rose to his full, intimidating height, his hand leaving her face to slide down her arm, his fingers wrapping around her wrist. His grip was firm but not painful, an iron band of ownership. He tugged her forward, pulling her away from the center of the room and toward the dais. She stumbled after him, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror and a strange, burgeoning spark of something else entirely. Safety. The feeling was ludicrous. Safety in the grasp of the most feared creature in the kingdom. Without a word, he swept her up into his arms. The movement was effortless, as if she weighed nothing more than a child's doll. A startled gasp escaped her lips. She was suddenly pressed against a chest as hard and unyielding as a wall of rock, surrounded by his heat and his wild, intoxicating scent. He carried her past the throne and through a dark archway behind it, into a private corridor carved from the same living stone. Torches ignited in their sconces as they passed, flaring to life as if commanded by his very presence. They moved through silent, opulent hallways that were a world away from the damp, crumbling passages of the lower citadel. Here, thick rugs muffled their steps, and intricate tapestries depicting ancient hunts and howling wolves covered the walls. He did not speak, his jaw set, his golden eyes fixed forward. Elara was too stunned, too overwhelmed, to do anything but cling to him, her fingers clutching the thick fur of his tunic. Where was he taking her? What did he want with her? The declaration in the throne room replayed in her mind. A famine only you can satisfy. What did that mean? Was this some cruel, elaborate game before the inevitable end? But the look in his eyes, the reverence in his touch, it had felt real. Viscerally real. He finally stopped before a set of heavy oak doors and pushed them open with his shoulder. He carried her inside and gently, so gently, set her down on her feet. She found herself in a vast, circular chamber. A massive hearth dominated one wall, a fire already crackling warmly within it. The room was furnished with heavy, dark wood furniture, shelves overflowing with leather-bound books, and a bed so large it could have slept 5 men. A wall of curved glass windows looked out over the kingdom. The twinkling lights of the city spread out like a carpet of fallen stars below. This was his private sanctum, his cage. And now, it was hers. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable, the molten gold of his eyes seeming to cool slightly, banked like embers. "You are safe here," he stated. It was a command, a promise. Safe? The word came out as a broken whisper. They sent me here to die." "They were fools," he rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. "They are blind. My wolf is not his wolf." He spoke of it as a separate entity, a second consciousness dwelling within him. And it was that wolf, he claimed, that had known her. The thought sent another shiver through her. This one not of fear, but of something deeper, a strange resonance that hummed in her blood. "I don't understand," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Who are you? What am I to you?" A flicker of something, pain, frustration, crossed his face. "I am Kaelen, and you are my mate." Mate. The word was a lightning strike. She had heard the term in whispers among the other servants. A fated bond, a connection of souls that was the most sacred and absolute law among the wolf shifters. It was a thing of legends and songs, not something that happened to scullery maids, and certainly not with the Alpha King. "No," she breathed, shaking her head. "That's impossible. I'm human." Or so she had always believed. She was an orphan, left on the Citadel's steps as an infant with no name, no history. "No," he countered, his voice firm. "There is shifter blood in you, however faint, dormant, but it is there. My wolf would not have chosen a true human. It has been howling your name for a century, a name I did not know until I saw you. It has been waiting." He took a step closer, and she flinched back, her hand flying to her throat. His eyes darkened with a hurt so profound it was startling. He stopped immediately, holding up his hands as if to show he meant no harm. The gesture was so at odds with his terrifying power that it only confused her more. "I will not harm you, Elara." He knew her name. How did he know her name? She had never been called anything but girl or you by the likes of Lord Valerius. "The bond," he explained, seeming to read the question in her eyes. "It gives me pieces of you. Your name, your fear, your hunger." His gaze dropped to her stomach, and a deep, angry growl rumbled in his chest. "They starved you." Before she could respond, he turned and strode to a cord by the hearth, giving it a sharp pull. Moments later, the chamber door opened and an old woman entered. She was stooped with age, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She carried a tray laden with food, bread, cheese, roasted meat, a steaming bowl of stew, and a pitcher of water. She bowed her head deeply to Kaelen before her gaze fell upon Elara. Her eyes widened, a look of profound shock and dawning understanding on her face. "Lyra," Kaelen commanded, his voice softer now but still laced with authority. "She is weak. Attend to her." The old woman, Lyra, approached Elara cautiously, as one might approach a frightened fawn. "My child," she murmured, her voice like dry, rustling leaves. "Come, you must eat." Lyra guided her to a chair near the fire, setting the tray on a small table. The smell of the food was agonizing, and Elara's stomach cramped with a painful, desperate need. She reached for the bread with a trembling hand, her movements clumsy. Lyra gently took the bread and broke off a small piece, dipping it into the stew, slowly. The old woman cautioned. "Too much, too fast, will make you ill." Elara ate, each mouthful an explosion of flavor, a balm to the raw ache inside her. Kaelen stood by the windows, his back to them, watching the city below. He was giving her space, yet his presence filled the entire room, a silent, brooding mountain of a man. She could feel his attention on her as surely as if his hand was on her shoulder. As the warmth of the food spread through her, the sharp edges of her terror began to soften, replaced by a deep, weary confusion. Lyra watched her with those knowing eyes, a small, gentle smile on her lips. "The Alpha King has waited a very long time for you, little one," the healer said softly. "Waited for me?" Elara swallowed a mouthful of stew. "He doesn't know me, I'm nobody." "You are not nobody," Lyra corrected patiently. "You are his mate, the other half of his soul, the anchor for his rage. Without a mate, the Shadowmir curse deepens with every passing year. The wolf grows stronger, the man weaker. It drives them to madness, to feral rage. It is why he has remained in this tower, to protect his people from himself." A curse. So the stories were true. A wave of pity, an emotion she never would have thought possible to feel for the fearsome Alpha King, washed over her. He was a prisoner, just as she had been. "But why me? I have no power. I'm not one of you." Lyra's gaze was intense. "Are you certain of that, child? Your parentage is unknown, and the bond does not lie. It would not form this strongly unless there was something extraordinary within you, something that answers the shadow in him." She paused, her eyes searching Elara's face. "There are old legends, legends of the Luminary, shifters with the blood of the sun, whose light could soothe the Shadowmir darkness and bring balance to the wolf. A line thought to be lost for 1,000 years. Luminary. The word was foreign, mythical. It had nothing to do with her. She was Elara, the girl who scrubbed floors and stole bread. She was not some lost princess from a legend. It was too much. Her head spun. The food, the warmth, the impossible revelations all crashing down on her at once. I need to rest," she whispered, her voice faint. Lyra nodded in understanding. "Of course." She helped Elara to her feet and led her toward the enormous bed. The sheets were fine linen, the furs atop them impossibly soft. It was more luxury than she had known in her entire life. As she sank into the mattress, exhaustion claimed her like a tidal wave. Through heavy eyelids, she saw Kaelen turn from the window. He crossed the room and stood by the bed, looking down at her. The firelight cast his harsh features in flickering shades of orange and black. making him look even more like a primordial king of shadow and flame. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her gut. But it was tangled with something else now. Curiosity, a sliver of unwilling empathy, and the undeniable, terrifying pull of the bond he spoke of. A bond that hummed between them like an invisible, vibrating cord. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, bound to a monster. But for the first time in her life, she was not cold, and she was not hungry. And a terrifying, traitorous part of her wondered if this prison was better than the freedom she had known before. Her last conscious thought was of his molten gold eyes, watching over her as she drifted into a dreamless sleep. Together. The word echoed in the silent spaces of her mind, a promise and a threat all in one. Days bled into a strange, suspended reality. Elara lived in the opulent tower, a world of soft fabrics, warm fires, and endless food. Kaelen was a constant, brooding presence. He rarely spoke, but he was always there, watching her from across the room as she read from his vast collection of books, or standing on the balcony, a silent guardian against the world below. He never pushed, never demanded. Yet his possessiveness was a tangible thing, a current in the air between them. The bond was a constant hum beneath her skin. Sometimes it was a gentle warmth, a feeling of rightness when he was near. Other times, it was a sharp, aching pain in her chest, a phantom agony that she soon realized was a reflection of his own. He was suffering. The proximity to her, his unclaimed mate, was a unique form of torture for him. It was like holding a flame to his hand, a constant test of his legendary control. She learned this from Lyra, who visited daily. The old healer would bring her meals, tend to the lingering weakness from her starvation, and speak of the old ways. She explained the Shadowmir curse in more detail, a legacy of an ancient war that had tainted their bloodline with a primal, uncontrollable rage. For generations, Alpha Kings had gone mad, their reigns ending in blood and fire. Kaelen's father had been one of them. Kaelen had spent his entire life, over 200 years, fighting the beast within, locking himself away to keep his kingdom safe from his own power. "He needs you, Elara," Lyra insisted one afternoon as she brushed Elara's hair, which was now clean and shining for the first time in memory. "The bond, once completed, will anchor him. Your light, the luminary light we believe you carry, will soothe the shadow. It will not cure the curse, but it will bring him into balance. It will make him whole." "He wants to claim me," Elara said, the words tasting like ash. The claiming was the physical completion of the bond, a bite that would mark her as his forever, body and soul. The thought sent a jolt of primal fear through her. "He will not take you against your will," Lyra said, her voice firm. "He has waited centuries. He will wait longer if he must, but the strain of the incomplete bond, it is fraying him, and it is dangerous for you both." Elara saw it for herself that evening. She was reading by the fire when a wave of such violent, searing rage washed over her that she cried out, dropping her book. It wasn't her own emotion. It was his. It was a bonfire of fury, so potent it felt like it would burn her from the inside out. She looked up to see Kaelen standing by the window, his entire body rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides so tightly his knuckles were white. His golden eyes were blazing, no longer molten but burning supernovas. "Kaelen?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't seem to hear her. A low, feral growl escaped his lips, the sound of the wolf straining at its leash. The air in the room grew heavy, crackling with raw, untamed power. The flames in the hearth leaped and danced wildly, casting frantic shadows on the walls. He was losing control. The beast was surfacing. Panic seized her. But beneath the panic, the bond pulsed, a desperate, aching cord pulling her toward him. It did not want her to run. It wanted her to help. Without thinking, driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she stood up and walked toward him. "Kaelen," she said again, her voice stronger this time. He turned his head slowly, his blazing eyes fixing on her. For a second, she saw no recognition there, only the mindless hunger of the predator. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her ground. She reached out a trembling hand and laid it on his arm. The moment her skin touched him, it was like grounding a lightning storm. A visible shudder ran through his massive frame. The inferno in his eyes flickered, the raw gold softening back to something resembling his own. He sucked in a ragged breath, the tension draining from his body. He looked down at her hand on his arm as if it were a miracle, then up at her face, his expression one of raw, agonizing vulnerability. "It grows worse," he rasped, his voice rough with self-loathing. "The proximity to you, it makes the beast rage for what it cannot have." He pulled his arm away as if her touch burned him, putting distance between them. "I am a danger to you." "You didn't hurt me," she pointed out softly. "I almost did," he bit out, turning his back to her again. "One day, my control will break, and I will." He couldn't finish the sentence. The thought was too horrific. "Every moment I am near you is a battle." This was his life, a constant war against himself. And she, his supposed salvation, was also his greatest torment. The injustice of it pricked at her heart. She was beginning to see past the monster, past the Alpha King, to the man trapped inside. A man who was profoundly, devastatingly lonely. A few days later, the first real test arrived. Rhys, Kaelen's beta and second in command, appeared at the chamber doors, his face grim. He bowed to Kaelen, his eyes flicking nervously toward Elara before focusing back on his alpha. "My king," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Lord Valerius has called a council of the vassal lords at the northern border. He claims you have abandoned your duties, that your rule is compromised. He is stoking the embers of rebellion." Kaelen's eyes narrowed, a low growl building in his chest. Valerius, the man who had sent Elara to her death. The Viper was making his move. "He uses my absence as a weapon against me," Kaelen murmured, his voice deadly calm. "I must go. I must show them the Shadowmir rule is not broken." "Go?" A cold dread washed over Elara. The thought of him leaving, of being left alone in this tower, was suddenly terrifying. It was an irrational fear. She was safer without the volatile Alpha King nearby, wasn't she? But the bond cried out in silent protest. He must have felt her fear. He turned to her, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I will be gone 3 days. No more. Rhys and a dozen of my royal guard will remain. You will not be left unprotected." 3 days, she whispered. It felt like an eternity. "It is a necessity," he said, his voice softening as he saw the genuine fear in her eyes. He stepped closer, and for the first time, he initiated a touch that was not a reaction or an accident. He reached out and took her hand, his large, warm fingers engulfing hers. The contact sent a wave of warmth and reassurance through her, a stark contrast to the cold dread she felt. "The separation will be difficult," he admitted, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble meant only for her. "The bond will stretch. It will cause us both pain. For me, it will feel as though my soul is being torn in two. Forgive me for the agony it will cause you." This was it. The moment of vulnerability Lyra had spoken of. He was not just a king stating his plans. He was a man, her mate, confessing his fear and his weakness. He was admitting the depth of his need for her, the power she held over him without even trying. The stoic, impenetrable facade had cracked, and the man beneath was laid bare. "Be careful," she found herself saying, the words surprising her as much as they did him. A flicker of surprise, then a deep, burning warmth lit his golden eyes. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture of a courtly knight, not a feral beast. The touch was a brand, a promise. "I have you to come back to," he murmured. "I have never had that before. I will not fail." With one last, lingering look, he released her hand, turned, and swept from the room, Rhys at his heels. The great doors closed behind him, and the silence he left in his wake was heavier and more profound than his presence had ever been. The moment he was truly gone, the pain started. It began as a dull ache in her chest, a hollow feeling of loss, but as the hours passed, it sharpened into a physical agony, a tearing sensation right over her heart. It was exactly as he had described. It felt like her soul was being ripped apart. She collapsed onto the bed, curling into a ball, gasping for breath against the waves of vicarious torment. It was his pain she was feeling, his agony at the separation, amplified and echoed back into her own body through the raw, frayed thread of the incomplete bond. Now she understood. This was the curse. This was the price of their connection. And she wondered if she was strong enough to pay it. The first day of Kaelen's absence was a blur of exquisite torment. The tearing pain in Elara's chest ebbed and flowed, but never vanished. It was a constant, agonizing reminder of the miles stretching between them. Lyra brought her willow bark tea for the pain, but it barely touched the edges of the supernatural agony. Elara could feel him. She could feel his frustration, his simmering rage at the political games he was forced to play. And underneath it all, the deep, thrumming ache of his separation from her. It was an invasion, a violation of her own mind. Yet it also fostered a strange, unwanted intimacy. She knew his heart better than she knew her own. On the second day, the pain lessened slightly, settling into a deep, melancholic ache. She found a strange comfort in the tower that had once been her prison. It was his space filled with his scent, and it was the only thing that soothed the frayed edges of her nerves. She spent the day wrapped in a fur blanket on the wide window seat, staring down at the kingdom, feeling like a Rapunzel of a different sort, not waiting for a prince but tied by an invisible chain to a beast. Anya. The thought of her friend surfaced through the fog of pain. She had been taken away when Elara was condemned. Where was she? Was she safe? Elara had been so consumed by her own whirlwind of fate that she hadn't even asked. A pang of guilt, sharp and wholly her own, cut through the bond's phantom pain. She asked Lyra that afternoon when the healer came with her lunch. The old woman's face grew somber. "She was returned to the servants' quarters, child. Lord Valerius made it clear that any association with you was unwise. She has been isolated, punished for being her friend." The injustice of it made Elara's blood boil. "I want to see her." "That is not possible," Lyra said gently. "The Alpha King's orders were absolute. You are to remain in this tower until his return." "He ordered me protected, not imprisoned," Elara retorted, a spark of her old defiance flaring to life. "Anya is in danger because of me. Valerius will not stop at isolating her. He will use her." Lyra sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Your heart is good, Elara, but you underestimate the danger. Lord Valerius is not a man to be trifled with. He left the citadel the same day as the king, but his men remain. They watch." The warning sent a chill down Elara's spine, but it did not quell her resolve. It hardened it. She would not let someone else suffer for her. The attack came that night. The pain of the bond had lulled her into a fitful sleep. She was jolted awake not by a sound, but by a sudden, violent spike of her own terror. The guards Kaelen had left, the elite royal guard, were gone. She could feel their absence. The wards on the tower, powered by Kaelen's own magic, flickered and died. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the dead, heavy silence of a tomb. She shot out of bed, her heart hammering. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. A faint scraping sound came from the balcony. Her eyes darted to the glass windows. Dark shapes were moving out there, grappling hooks biting into the stone. Valerius's men. They had bypassed the main door and were scaling the tower itself. Lyra's warning echoed in her ears. They watch. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She was trapped. There was nowhere to run. The main door was solid oak and iron, barred from the outside now, she was certain. Her eyes scanned the room, desperate for a weapon, a way out. A heavy iron poker from the fireplace. A letter opener on the desk. Useless. The glass of the windows shattered inward, and two men in the dark gray livery of the Van Thorn house dropped onto the balcony, swords drawn. They were followed by two more. They moved with a chilling efficiency, their faces hidden by leather cowls. "Lord Valerius sends his regards," one of them rasped, stepping into the room. "He has decided he wants the prize for himself." Elara backed away, her hands held up as if to ward them off. Her back hit the cold stone of the far wall. Cornered. The terror was a living thing in her throat, choking her. She could feel Kaelen, miles away, a sudden jolt of alarm cutting through his own weary frustration. He felt her terror, but he was too far. He would never make it in time. The first man lunged. Time seemed to slow. She saw the glint of his sword, the cruel twist of his lips. Death was coming for her again. But this time something inside her rebelled. A fierce, primal instinct to survive roared to life. It was not just for herself. It was for the man whose pain she shared, for the future she was just beginning to comprehend. No, she would not die here. As the man swung his sword, Elara threw her hands up in a desperate, reflexive gesture of defense. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. A blinding flash of silver-white light erupted from her palms. It was not a fire, not a physical force, but a wave of pure, incandescent brilliance. It struck the attacker square in the chest. He screamed, not in pain, but in sheer, soul-shaking shock, and was thrown backward as if by a giant, unseen hand. He slammed into the stone balustrade of the balcony and crumpled to the ground, smoke rising from his tunic, his body spasming. The other men froze, their eyes wide with disbelief and a new, dawning fear. Elara stared at her own hands, which were glowing with a soft, residual luminescence. What was that? Where had it come from? Luminary. The blood of the sun. Lyra's words. It was real. The power was real. It was in her. The shock of her own action was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline. She had a weapon after all, a weapon they had not anticipated. But she was weak, untrained. The single burst of power had left her dizzy and breathless. The remaining 3 men exchanged a look, their fear warring with their orders. "She's a witch," one of them yelled. "Grab her! Don't let her do that again!" They came at her at once, spreading out to flank her. She was a cornered animal, and they were the hounds closing in. She tried to summon the light again, focusing, pushing, but only a faint flicker danced across her fingertips. She had spent it all in that one desperate act. Just as the man on her left reached for her, a roar of pure apocalyptic fury ripped through the night. It was a sound that shook the very foundations of the tower. A promise of bloody retribution that made the blood of every living creature for miles run cold. Kaelen. The windows on the opposite side of the room exploded inward in a shower of glass and stone. A colossal shape, a whirlwind of black fur and moonlight, launched itself into the room. It was Kaelen, but not as she knew him. He was in his full wolf form, a creature of nightmare and legend. He was larger than a horse, his fur the color of a starless midnight, his eyes burning with the light of twin hells. This was not the man, not the king. This was the beast unleashed. He had felt her terror, her desperation, the flare of her power across the bond, and he had come. He must have run faster than any horse, faster than the wind itself, a black streak of vengeance across the land. The Vanthorn men were paralyzed with primal fear. They were soldiers, killers, but they were not prepared for this. Not for the living incarnation of the Shadowmir curse. The great wolf was on them in a blur of motion. It was not a fight. It was a slaughter. A blur of black fur, the flash of claws like sickles, the sickening crunch of bone. One man was thrown across the room, his body hitting the wall with a wet thud. Another's sword was snapped in two before the wolf's massive jaws closed around his throat. It was brutal, savage, and over in seconds. The last man standing, the one who had first spoken, dropped his sword and scrambled backward, his face a mask of abject terror. He tried to flee back onto the balcony, but the great wolf was there, blocking his path, a low, guttural growl vibrating the air. Then the wolf turned its head, its burning golden eyes finding Elara huddled against the wall. The inferno in them softened for a barest fraction of a second. Recognition, protection, mine. He turned back to the last surviving attacker. He did not kill him. He simply opened his massive jaws and let out a roar that tore a scream of pure madness from the man's throat. The soldier clutched his head, fell to his knees, and then simply collapsed. His mind shattered by the raw, undiluted power of the Alpha's rage. The room fell silent. The only sounds the crackling of the fire and Elara's own ragged breathing. The great wolf stood amidst the carnage, his massive chest heaving. Slowly, with a ripple of darkness and shadow, the form began to shift and condense. The fur receded, the bones reshaped. In moments, Kaelen stood there in his man form, naked to the waist, his chest and arms splattered with the blood of his enemies. His golden eyes, still burning with the echoes of the beast, found hers. He crossed the ruined room in 3 long strides and fell to his knees before her, ignoring the bodies, the broken glass, the destruction. He reached out, his hands hovering over her as if afraid to touch, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for any injury. "Did they harm you?" he rasped, his voice raw with fury and fear. "No," she whispered, still shaking. I think I hurt one of them." She looked at her hands, no longer glowing, but feeling strangely warm. His gaze followed hers, and a look of fierce, savage pride entered his eyes. "Good." He finally closed the distance, his hands gently framing her face, his thumbs wiping away the tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "I felt it. Your fear, and then your light. It was a beacon in the dark. It called me home." He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her in an embrace that was both crushingly powerful and infinitely gentle. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. "I have you," he murmured, the words a sacred vow against her skin. "I have you. I will never leave you again." In the safety of his arms, surrounded by the evidence of his terrifying power unleashed solely for her, Elara finally let go. She sagged against him, her fear giving way to a profound, bone-deep sense of security. He had come for her. The monster had come to save her. And in that moment, she knew with a certainty that defied all logic that she was no longer afraid of the beast. She was afraid of the man who held her, and the devastating power he was beginning to have over her heart. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Kaelen's royal guard, having been lured away and dispatched with ruthless efficiency by Valerius's assassins, were replaced by a new contingent, their loyalty absolute and their vigilance unwavering. The shattered mind of the lone survivor was pried open by Kaelen's own grim power, revealing everything. Valerius had not gone north. It was a ruse, a feint to draw Kaelen away from the citadel. He was hidden somewhere in the sprawling city below, his plan to capture Elara and her witchcraft for himself now in ruins. "He knows," Kaelen said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. They stood on the repaired balcony, the morning sun casting long shadows across the stone. He had refused to let her out of his sight, a massive, protective shadow at her side. "He knows about your power. He may not know the name Luminary, but he knows you are more than you seem. He will not stop." "He will use Anya," Elara said, her voice flat with certainty. "He will use my friend to draw me out." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "No one will be used against you. I will find him. I will tear this city apart stone by stone." "And what if he hurts her before you do?" Elara challenged, turning to face him. The fear of the previous night had been burned away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She was done being a victim. She was done being a pawn. "He isn't after you, Kaelen. He's after me. This is my fight." "You are my mate," he roared, his control snapping, the golden eyes flaring. "Your fight is my fight. I will not let you walk into his trap, and I will not let my friend die while I hide in your tower," she shot back, her own anger rising to meet his. "You can't protect me from everything. You can't lock me away from the world and expect the world to leave us alone. Your way, the way of the Shadowmir, is rage and shadow and brute force. Valerius is a serpent. You hunt a serpent with stealth, not with a hammer." He stared at her, stunned into silence by her defiance. No one spoke to him this way. No one dared. But she was not just anyone. She was his mate, and the bond between them gave her a standing no other possessed. He saw the iron in her spine, the fire in her eyes, and he saw not insubordination, but the spirit of a queen. His fury receded, replaced by a grudging respect and a wave of fierce pride. What would you have me do? He asked, his voice low. Let me be the bait, she said, her plan forming even as she spoke. He wants me. Let him think he can have me. We will choose the place. We will set the trap. We will end this. Together. Together. The word resonated between them, a powerful chord. It took 2 days to orchestrate. A message, seemingly from a terrified Anya, was smuggled out of the Van Thorn-controlled sector of the city. It begged Elara to meet her at the old, abandoned Sun Temple in the city's heart, a place long since fallen to ruin. It was a trap, of course. A clumsy, obvious trap. And it was perfect. Kaelen hated the plan. Every protective instinct in his body screamed at him to lock her away and handle Valerius himself. But he looked at her, at the unwavering resolve in her eyes, and he knew she was right. To deny her this was to deny the very strength that made her his equal. The night of the meeting was cold and moonless. Elara, dressed in a simple dark cloak, stood in the center of the crumbling temple courtyard. Moonlight struggled through the broken dome above, illuminating the shattered altar and overgrown flagstones. Kaelen and his elite guard were hidden in the shadows surrounding the temple, a ring of silent, waiting death. She could feel him through the bond, a tightly leashed storm of predatory anticipation. I am here. I have you. She did not have to wait long. How touching! Lord Valerius's voice slithered out of the darkness. The little mouse comes for her friend. He stepped into the faint moonlight, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. He was not alone. A dozen of his best soldiers emerged from the ruined archways, forming a circle around her. And he had Anya. He held the terrified girl by the arm, a silver dagger pressed to her throat. Anya was weeping silently, her eyes pleading with Elara. I knew you wouldn't be able to resist, Valerius purred, his gaze devouring Elara. Such a noble heart, so easily manipulated. Let her go, Valerius, Elara said, her voice steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. Your fight is with me. Oh, it is, he agreed. I saw what you did in the tower. A fascinating little trick. The legends of the Luminary bloodline. I always thought they were just stories. A bloodline of light wielders, destined to bind themselves to the Shadowmir dogs. Imagine that power bound to me instead. A new dynasty. The Van Thorn dynasty, built on the power of the sun itself. He was insane. Power mad. He wanted to steal her bloodline, to twist it to his own corrupt ends. It will never be yours, Elara stated, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't know she had. Valerius laughed. Won't it? You see, I have studied the old texts. A luminary's power can be transferred, a ritual of blood and shadow. It will kill you, of course. A small price to pay for ultimate power. He tightened his grip on Anya, the dagger pricking her skin. A drop of blood welled. But first, a demonstration of your compliance. The Alpha King is out there, isn't he? I can feel his foul rage polluting the very air. Call him off, send him away, or the girl dies. Elara's blood ran cold. This was the moment, the sacrificial play. Through the bond, she felt Kaelen's fury spike, a volcanic pressure building. He was about to launch the attack. Anya would die. No. She sent the thought down the bond, a desperate, silent scream. Wait, trust me. She could feel his hesitation, the war between his rage and his trust in her. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but he held. The storm waited. Elara took a deep breath. She looked at Anya's terrified face, At Valerius's triumphant sneer, at the ring of swords closing in. She thought of Kaelen, holding back his own beast for her. A deep well of power, warm and golden, stirred within her. She was not just a girl, she was not just a mate, she was a luminary, and she would not be a victim. "You want my power, Valerius?" she said, her voice dropping, taking on a strange, resonant timbre. "Then have it." She closed her eyes and reached inward, not for the spark she had used before, but for the vast, sleeping sun she now knew resided in her soul. She pulled. The world vanished in a silent, blinding cataclysm of pure white gold light. It was not a flash. It was a nova, an explosion of raw, untamed creation that erupted from her, turning the moonless night to brilliant day. The power was immense, terrifying, a roaring inferno of light that threatened to consume her own consciousness. It was too much, far too much to control. It burned. It seared her from the inside out, threatening to tear her apart. "Elara!" Kaelen's voice, not in her ears but in her very soul, a lifeline in the blinding storm of her own power. He wasn't just watching. He was anchoring her. His own immense, dark power reached out through the bond, not to fight her light, but to surround it, to contain it, to give it shape. His strength became her vessel. His control became her focus. "I have you. Focus on me. Together." She clung to his presence, to his voice, to the unshakable certainty of the bond. The roaring inferno began to obey. The chaotic explosion of light coalesced, drawing inward, focusing. She opened her eyes. The world was awash in her golden radiance. Valerius's men were on their knees, shielding their eyes, screaming as the pure light burned away their shadows. Valerius had thrown Anya aside and was staggering back, his face a mask of horror and agony as the light he coveted turned on him. "No, it's not possible. It should be mine." "It was never yours." Elara's voice boomed, amplified by the power she now wielded. She raised a hand, and the light obeyed, lancing out not as a wave, but as solid tendrils of golden energy. They wrapped around Valerius, lifting him from the ground. He struggled, but he was helpless, a moth caught in a sunbeam. She could destroy him, obliterate him. The power was there. The rage, a reflection of Kaelen's own, urged her to do it. But she saw Anya, safe now, scrambling away. She felt Kaelen's steadying presence, and she chose. She was not a destroyer. She was a luminary, a light. With a final, focused push, she poured her power into him, not to kill, but to imprison. The golden light solidified, crystallizing around him. He screamed as his form was encased in shimmering, translucent amber, his face frozen forever in a mask of greed and terror. With a final flash, the light receded, leaving Lord Valerius a grotesque amber statue in the center of the ruined temple. The light faded, drawing back into her, leaving the night dark once more. The sudden absence of the power left her staggering, her legs giving way. The world tilted, her energy utterly spent. Before she hit the ground, he was there. Kaelen caught her, sweeping her up into his arms. His face was filled with a mixture of awe, relief, and a love so profound it took her breath away. His royal guard were dealing with the remaining blinded soldiers. Anya was being tended to by Rhys. The threat was over. He held her close, his lips pressing against her forehead. "My queen," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She looked up at him, her heart full. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. All that remained was the deep, unbreakable truth of the bond between them. "My king," she answered. The crisis was over. Lord Valerius, a permanent glittering monument to his own greed, was removed to the deepest vault in the citadel, a warning for all time. The Van Thorn house was disgraced, its power broken. Elara's friend Anya was given a place of honor within the royal household, forever safe. In the quiet days that followed, a new peace settled over the tower, over the citadel, over the entire kingdom. The change in Kaelen was palpable. The constant, simmering rage that had been his companion for centuries was gone, soothed by the mere presence of his bonded mate. The darkness in him had not vanished, but it was now balanced, a shadow that served the light. He spent his hours not brooding, but talking with her, sharing stories of his long life, listening to the details of her short one. He showed her the kingdom from the balcony, not as a possession, but as a responsibility, a home he now felt worthy of leading. The fear between them had been replaced by a deep and abiding tenderness, the possessiveness tempered into a fierce, unwavering devotion. One evening, he led her not to the dining table, but to the hearth. A simple meal of bread, cheese, and wine was laid out on a blanket before the roaring fire. The grand opulence of the room was forgotten, creating an island of simple intimacy just for them. "There is one thing left to do," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He took her hand, his golden eyes soft and full of love. "The bond is forged, but it is not yet complete. It is time to claim my mate, to make you my queen in soul as you already are in my heart." Elara's heart fluttered, but it was with anticipation, not fear. The claiming, the bite, the final, irrevocable joining. She was no longer the terrified girl who had been dragged to her death. She was a luminary. She was his equal. She was ready. She nodded, her throat too tight with emotion to speak. "This will not hurt," he promised, his voice a velvet whisper. "It is not an act of violence, but of union." He gently turned her, his hands on her shoulders, so her back was to his chest. He swept her hair aside, exposing the nape of her neck and her shoulder. She felt his warm breath on her skin, sending a shiver of pure pleasure through her. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her skin in a ghost of a kiss. "Mine," he murmured one last time, a vow spoken against her flesh. Then she felt the press of his teeth, a firm pressure that was not painful. It was a sharp, electric sensation, and then a flood of warmth as the bond, the true, complete bond, slammed into place. It was like a dam breaking. A torrent of energy, of memory, of emotion poured between them. She saw his life flash before her eyes, a lonely childhood spent in fear of his own power, the agony of watching his father succumb to the curse, the long, solitary centuries spent in the tower, the endless, howling ache for a mate he feared he would never find. She felt his loneliness, his despair, his undying hope, and he felt hers. He felt the cold, the hunger, the invisibility of her childhood. He felt her terror in the dungeon, her defiance in the throne room, the blossoming of her love for him. He felt every beat of her heart as if it were his own. Their souls, their lives, their very essences merged, intertwining until they were no longer two separate beings, but two halves of a single, perfect whole. When he drew back, a faint, shimmering mark, like a silver crescent moon, glowed on her shoulder before fading into her skin, a permanent sign of their union. She turned in his arms, her vision blurry with tears. He looked down at her, his own eyes shining, the last of his ancient pain finally washed away. "Elara," he breathed, his voice breaking with the weight of his love. She reached up, her hands framing his face, and pulled him down to her. Their first true kiss was not a thing of fire and fury, but of profound peace and homecoming. It was a kiss of equals, of partners, of a king and queen finally united. It was the sealing of a promise made across 1,000 years of darkness, now fulfilled in the light. Months later, the great hall of the Blackmir Citadel was filled to bursting. The vassal lords, the common folk, the entire Shadowmir pack were gathered. They were not there for a trial or a condemnation, but for a celebration. A coronation. Elara stood on the dais beside Kaelen, not as a consort, but as a ruler in her own right. She wore gowns of white and gold, the colors of the sun, and a simple circlet of silver rested on her head. But her true crown was the quiet, confident power that radiated from her, a gentle warmth that touched every corner of the once shadowed hall. Kaelen, her husband, her mate, her king, stood beside her, his hand in hers. The darkness was still a part of him, a cloak of power and authority, but it was no longer a curse. It was a shield, a balance to her light. His golden eyes, once burning with feral rage, now glowed with a steady, devoted love as he looked at her. The kingdom was thriving. The lands were fertile, the people secure. The Shadowmir curse, while not broken, was tamed. The Alpha King was no longer a monster in a tower, but a true, present ruler, his wisdom and strength tempered by the compassion and light of his queen. As the cheers of their people echoed through the hall, Kaelen leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "So, I have a kingdom at my feet," he murmured, his voice for her alone. "Tonight, I lay it at yours." She smiled, her heart overflowing. She turned and looked out at their people, at their future, her hand resting protectively over her own slightly rounded stomach, a secret joy known only to them. They had been brought together by a punishment, an act of cruelty and fear. But from those ashes, they had forged a love that had remade a kingdom. The beast had found its salvation. The lost girl had found her power, and together they had found their home. Thank you so much for listening to this story on His Wolf Knew First. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me which moment moved you the most. Your support truly means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next story on His Wolf Knew First.